The stars glittered in the endless expanse of space as Lieutenant Jake Harris sat in his cockpit, staring at the black void ahead. He was on a routine patrol near the outer reaches of the Milky Way, tasked with monitoring the galactic perimeter. It had been a long week of uneventful patrols, the silence of space often giving him too much time to think. Jake was just about to doze off when a sudden blip appeared on his radar. Identified object detected. His ship's AI, Athena, chimed in, jolting him awake. Jake leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Athena, get me a visual. The monitor flickered, revealing a strange, sleek ship unlike anything he'd seen before. It shimmered, reflecting the distant starlight, and seemed to pulse with a soft blue glow. Unknown ship. No records found in the database. Athena informed him. Great, Jake muttered, flipping switches to bring his weapons systems online, just when things were getting boring. Before he could act, a voice crackled through the com system. It was soft but firm, with a slight metallic undertone. Human vessel, do not engage. We mean you no harm. Jake blinked in surprise. Who are you? The voice hesitated before responding. I am Zura of the Telethians, and I request permission to board your vessel. Jake's hand hovered over the weapons controls. He'd never heard of the Telethians. An unknown species suddenly appearing in the far reaches of human territory was never a good sign. But something about the voice was inviting. I don't know if I trust you, Zura, Jake replied cautiously. You have nothing to fear, Zura replied smoothly. I am unarmed. This is not a trick, human. I just want to meet you. The curiosity in her voice caught him off guard. Jake hesitated, then let out a deep breath. Fine, you have permission to board, but any funny business, and this won't end well for you. There was a brief silence before Zura's ship drifted closer, docking with Jake's vessel. The airlock hissed, and Jake waited, heart pounding. The door slid open, revealing a figure unlike anything he'd expected. Zura stepped through, her tall, slender form encased in a shimmering suit that seemed to shift colors as she moved. Her skin was a pale violet, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light of the cockpit. She smiled, revealing sharp teeth. No tricks, human, she said, her voice smooth and teasing. I'm your alien playmate for life. Jake stood frozen, taking in the unexpected figure before him. Zura wasn't the intimidating, menacing alien he had imagined. She was tall, certainly, and her glowing eyes hinted at something otherworldly. But there was a playful air about her. You look surprised, she said, tilting her head. Did you expect something more monstrous? Jake found his voice, though it came out more nervous than he'd hoped. I didn't expect you to be so casual. Zura chuckled, the sound soft and almost musical. I find that humans often expect the worst, but I'm not here to harm you, Jake Harris. Jake blinked. How do you know my name? Her glowing eyes sparkled with amusement. Your ship's AI broadcasts it freely across your systems. I've been listening since we docked. Jake's face flushed. He hadn't thought about how easy it would be for an alien of advanced technology to access his systems. Okay, he said, trying to maintain his composure. What do you want, Zura? Zura's smile faded slightly. She moved closer, her steps graceful. To learn, Jake. My people have been observing humans for years. We find you fascinating. Fascinating, Jake echoed, raising an eyebrow. Why? You humans, Zura began, circling him slowly, her eyes never leaving his. You're curious, reckless. You push beyond your limits even when it doesn't make sense. You've built ships, technology, colonies, yet you're always a step behind in understanding the universe. Jake frowned. Sounds like you think we're inferior. Not at all, Zura corrected quickly. In fact, it's your imperfections that make you exciting. Jake folded his arms. So what now? You observe me for some alien experiment. Zura stopped, her face softening. No, Jake. I'm not here to study you like a lab rat. I'm here because I want to understand humans on a personal level. And I thought you might be curious about us too. There was a sincerity in her tone that disarmed him. Despite her alien appearance, there was something almost human in her expression. Jake let out a sigh, his guard slowly lowering. All right, Zura. Let's say I believe you. What exactly do you want from me? Zura's smile returned, this time more genuine. The partnership, Jake. I want to learn about you, and in return, I'll share knowledge about my people. We could learn so much from each other. Jake hesitated. The idea of being the first human to form a bond with an alien species was tempting, but it also came with risks. Still, there was something about Zura, her curiosity, her strange sense of humor, that made him want to trust her. All right, he said finally. I'll play along, but no more tricks. Zura grinned, her sharp teeth glinting in the low light. No more tricks, human. I'm your playmate for life now. The following days aboard the ship were a blur of conversation and exploration. Zura was unlike anyone Jake had ever met, human or alien. She was curious, often asking questions about Earth's culture, history, and technology. But there was always a playful undertone in her inquiries, as if she was testing him with every answer. You humans still fight over resources, she said one evening, reclining in the cockpit. My people overcame that centuries ago. We learned to share, to pool our knowledge for the greater good. Jake shrugged, glancing at the stars outside the window. It's not that simple for us. We're stubborn. We want what we want. Zura nodded thoughtfully. That's what makes you dangerous. But it's also why I think your species has potential. Jake couldn't help but smile at the compliment. I never thought an alien would flatter humanity. Zura's eyes gleamed. I never thought a human would trust me. Yet here we are. The weeks passed, and the two grew closer. Their conversations shifted from cultural exchanges to personal stories. Jake shared tales of his childhood, his time in the military, and the loneliness of space. Zura, in turn, spoke of her homeworld, her family, and her people's long history of exploration. But despite the growing bond, there was always an unspoken tension between them. Zura's presence aboard the ship wasn't officially sanctioned, and Jake knew that if his superiors found out, it could spell trouble. Do you ever miss your home? Jake asked one night as they floated in the artificial gravity of the ship's common room. Zura paused, her playful demeanor fading slightly. Sometimes, but I've been away for so long that Earth feels more like home now. Jake frowned. You've been here before. Zura's smile returned, though there was a sadness behind it. Not in this body, but yes, I visited Earth many times. Your people just never knew. Jake's curiosity piqued. Why? What were you doing there? Zura's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Watching. Waiting. And now, I found what I've been looking for. The cryptic answer sent a chill down Jake's spine. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know what Zura meant by that, but the connection between them had already been forged. And whatever lay ahead, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Jake stared at Zura, her cryptic words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Watching. Waiting for what? His voice was edged with suspicion, but also curiosity. Zura had been evasive at times, but this felt different. There was weight behind her words now. Zura's playful smile softened into something more serious, her glowing eyes dimming as she contemplated her response. She stood up and began pacing the room, her graceful movements almost hypnotic. For years, my people have been monitoring the development of various species. She began, her voice quieter than usual. We study, we observe, but we never intervene. Your kind, humanity, has always been of particular interest. Jake leaned forward, a frown forming on his face. Why us? We're just one species out of countless others in the galaxy. Because humans are unpredictable, Zura said, stopping her pacing to face him. Your species has the potential for both incredible creation and unparalleled destruction. You've survived wars, disasters, even the harshness of space itself, when many others would have perished. That's why we've been watching you. Jake's mind raced. You say we. Who else is involved? And what have you been looking for? Zura's expression became unreadable. My people, the Telethians, have long believed that every species has a point where they either transcend their limitations or destroy themselves. You humans are nearing that point. I was sent to observe, and to guide, if necessary. Guide? Jake's voice was sharp. You mean manipulate us? Zura shook her head. No, Jake, we don't want to control you. We want to help you realize your potential, before it's too late. Jake felt a surge of anger rising. Too late for what? Zura's glowing eyes locked onto his. There's a darkness approaching, something far more dangerous than you can imagine. My people have seen it in other parts of the galaxy. A force that consumes everything in its path. And Earth. Earth is right in its trajectory. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. You're talking about an invasion. Zura's voice was heavy with the weight of truth. Not just an invasion. A reckoning. And if humanity isn't ready, it won't survive. The room fell into silence, the hum of the ship's systems the only sound between them. Jake's mind raced with questions, but one stood out. Why me? Why are you telling me this? Zura stepped closer, her tall figure casting a shadow over him. Because you're different, Jake. You think differently. You question, you adapt, and you fight. That's why I chose you. You have the strength to face what's coming, and to unite others in the fight. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't just a random pilot anymore. He was part of something much bigger, something that could decide the fate of humanity. Zura reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. I've been waiting for someone like you, Jake. Someone who can see beyond the immediate danger and plan for what's ahead. Jake swallowed hard, his mind spinning with the gravity of the situation. What exactly are you asking me to do? Zura's lips curved into a soft smile. I want you to help me prepare your people. Together, we can make sure humanity stands a chance when the darkness arrives. Jake was silent for a long moment, the weight of the universe pressing down on him. He had signed up for this mission expecting a routine patrol, and now he was being asked to become part of a fight for the survival of his species. Finally, he nodded. All right, Zura, I'm in, but no more secrets. If we're going to do this, we do it together. No tricks. Zura's smile widened, a glint of satisfaction in her glowing eyes. No more tricks, human. I'm your partner for life now. In the days that followed, Zura and Jake began working together in earnest. Zura's knowledge of the galaxy was vast, and she shared insights that reshaped Jake's understanding of space and the threats that lay hidden in its depths. They spent hours discussing strategy, technology, and potential allies. Jake quickly realized that Zura wasn't exaggerating about the danger. The force she spoke of, the darkness, was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. It was an entity, a swarm of creatures or machines that consumed entire planets, leaving nothing but barren wastelands in their wake. The Telethians fought them once, Zura said one evening as they stood on the observation deck, staring out into the vastness of space. We barely survived, but humanity has something we didn't. Resilience, a stubbornness that refuses to die. It's your greatest strength. Jake turned to look at her. And what about your people? Can't they help us fight this thing? Zura shook her head, her expression grim. The Telethians are scattered, fragmented after the last war. Many of them believe that isolation is the only way to survive. They won't help. Then it's up to us, Jake muttered, clenching his fists. Zura nodded. Yes, but you won't be alone. There are others out there, other species who have faced the darkness and survived. We need to find them, unite them. If we stand together, we might stand a chance. The enormity of the task ahead was daunting, but Jake felt a spark of determination ignite within him. For the first time, he understood why Zura had chosen him. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a leader, and now, he had a mission that mattered more than anything he'd ever faced. As the days passed, their partnership grew stronger. The banter between them became more natural, the trust deepening. Jake found himself relying on Zura's insights, while she in turn respected his tactical mind and ability to think on his feet. But as the bond between them grew, so did the stakes. Time was running out, and the darkness was coming closer with each passing day. "We need to make contact with Earth's leadership," Jake said one evening as they finalized their plans. "If they don't know what's coming, we won't have a chance to prepare." Zura hesitated. "Do you think they'll believe us?" Jake grimaced. "They'll have to. Because if they don't, it's game over for all of us." Jake's words lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of their mission. The next steps were clear. They had to contact Earth's leadership and warn them of the coming threat. But the question of whether humanity was ready to listen gnawed at Jake's mind. If the leaders of Earth dismissed them, it could spell disaster for everyone. "We'll need proof," Jake muttered as he paced the cockpit. "Just telling them about an unseen enemy isn't going to cut it." Zura leaned against the control panel, her glowing eyes following his movements. "There are signs of the darkness in other sectors, places where they've already passed through. If we can get close enough, we might be able to gather evidence." Jake stopped pacing, crossing his arms. "And how do you suggest we do that? You've already said your people aren't willing to help, and I doubt Earth's leadership will just let us fly into restricted zones based on a vague alien warning." Zura's gaze flickered with amusement. "We don't need permission, Jake. We just need to be discreet." A smirk tugged at the corner of Jake's mouth. "Discreet, huh? You're full of surprises." "Only for you," Zura teased, though there was an edge to her words. "We need to act quickly. The darkness moves fast, and once it reaches a system, it doesn't leave anything behind." Jake's smirk faded as reality crashed back in. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "We'll head to one of those systems and gather whatever proof we can. But if we're going to convince anyone, we need more than just destroyed worlds. We need allies." Zura nodded. "There are a few species we can reach out to, but they won't be easy to persuade. Many of them have lost hope. They don't believe anyone can stop the darkness." "Then we'll give them something to believe in," Jake said, determination stealing his voice. "It's time to show them that humanity isn't going down without a fight." As they prepared to leave the Milky Way and head for the first system ravaged by the darkness, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His ship's sensors didn't detect anything unusual, but something in the pit of his stomach told him trouble was brewing. The jump to the distant system was smooth, but the moment they dropped out of hyperspace, Jake knew something was wrong. The system before them was a graveyard. Planets that once teemed with life now floated like ghostly husks, their surfaces scared and lifeless. There was no sign of movement, no energy signatures, nothing. Zura's voice was soft. "This is what the darkness leaves behind." Jake gripped the controls, staring in disbelief. How could something do this? Entire planets, just gone. "It's not just destruction," Zura replied, her voice somber. "The darkness consumes everything, life, energy, even memories. It leaves behind emptiness, a void where nothing can grow or thrive again." Jake's mind reeled at the scale of it. He had seen destruction before, but this was annihilation on a level he couldn't fathom. "We need to scan the surface," Jake said, snapping back into action. "If we can gather data on the residual energy signatures, we might have something to show Earth's leadership." Zura nodded, but as Jake initiated the scans, alarms blared through the cockpit. "Incoming ships." Athena, the ship's AI, warned. "Multiple contacts closing in fast." Jake's heart raced. Who the hell could be out here? Zura's expression darkened. "Pirates," scavengers who prey on dead systems like this. The sensor screen lit up with red blips as a fleet of small, heavily armed ships appeared from the shadows of a nearby asteroid field. Their weapons were hot, targeting systems already locked on Jake's vessel. "Great," Jake muttered, slamming his hands on the controls. "Athena, prepare for evasive maneuvers." The ship lurched to the side as the first wave of pirate fire streaked past them, barely missing their hull. Jake's fingers danced across the controls, pushing the ship to its limits as they weaved through the debris of the dead planets. "Zura, any bright ideas?" Jake shouted over the sound of blaring alarms. Zura's eyes flickered with concentration as she accessed the ship's systems. "We need to get out of here, but if we jump to hyperspace now, they'll track our trajectory. We can't let them follow us," Jake muttered, glancing at the rapidly approaching pirate ships. "Any chance we can lose them in the asteroid field?" Zura's smile was sharp. "I thought you'd never ask." The ship dove into the asteroid field, massive chunks of rock drifting slowly through the void. The pirates followed, their ships smaller and more maneuverable. Jake's eyes flicked between the controls and the sensors, his mind racing as he piloted them through the dense field. "They're gaining on us," Jake growled as a burst of laser fire clipped their rear shields. Zura's fingers moved swiftly across the console. "Hold them off for a few more seconds. I have an idea." "You better be quick," Jake yelled, jerking the ship into a sharp turn to avoid a collision with a spinning asteroid. The pirates were relentless, their weapons' fire growing more accurate with every passing second. Suddenly, Zura hit a final button, and the ship's systems flickered. "What did you do?" Jake asked, panic rising in his voice. "Trust me," Zura replied with a grin. "I just gave them a gift they won't forget." Massive explosion rocked the asteroid field as one of the larger asteroids behind them detonated, sending shockwaves and debris scattering in every direction. The pirates' ships were caught in the blast, their formations thrown into chaos. Jake let out a breath of relief as the pirate fleet scattered, their ships either disabled or retreating. "Nice work," Jake said, shooting Zura an impressed look. Zura leaned back in her seat, her smile triumphant. "I told you, no tricks, just clever solutions." With the immediate danger behind them, Jake reinitiated the scans, collecting the data they needed. But as they prepared to leave the system, something in the darkness caught Jake's eye. Faint flickering signal on the edge of the scanner, coming from a small, heavily damaged ship drifting among the wreckage. "Zura," Jake said slowly, "we're not alone." Zura's expression hardened as she stared at the monitor. "That ship, it's not human." The signal grew stronger as they approached, and Jake's stomach churned with unease. Whoever, or whatever, was on that ship might hold the key to understanding the enemy. Or it might be something far worse. "Should we board it?" Jake asked, his hand hovering over the controls. Zura's glowing eyes met his, and for the first time, Jake saw real fear in them. "We have to." Jake felt the weight of Zura's fear settle over him as they neared the drifting ship. It was unlike anything he'd seen before, sleek, dark, and menacing. The outer hull seemed to absorb the faint starlight, making it appear as if the ship was cloaked in shadow. Even in its damaged state, it gave off an aura of quiet menace. Athena's voice broke through the silence. No life signs detected aboard the vessel, but residual energy readings are highly unusual. Jake frowned, his fingers hesitating over the docking controls. Define unusual. "There are faint traces of an energy signature unlike anything in our database. It doesn't match known species technology. It's foreign." Zura's eyes remained fixed on the screen, her violet skin slightly paler than usual. "That's the darkness. It's their signature." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "You're saying this ship belonged to them?" Zura nodded slowly. "Or at least, it's been touched by them. We need to be careful, Jake. The darkness doesn't leave things behind without a reason." Jake's mind raced with possibilities. This could be their proof. the key to convincing Earth and the other species that the threat was real. But there was something deeply unsettling about the ship, as if it was watching them, waiting. "We're boarding it," Jake said, the decision final in his voice. "If there's anything inside that can help us understand the darkness, we need to find it." Zura hesitated but nodded, her posture tense. "I'll come with you. You'll lead someone who understands what we're dealing with." As they donned their spacesuits and prepared for the boarding procedure, Jake couldn't shake the sense of dread that clung to him. This wasn't just a salvage operation. This was a journey into the unknown. The airlock hissed as they connected with the alien ship. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as the door slid open, revealing the dark, cramped corridor ahead. The interior was just as foreboding as the outside, cold, metallic, and unnervingly silent. "This place gives me the creeps," Jake muttered as they stepped into the corridor, their boots clanging softly against the metal floor. Zura was silent, her glowing eyes scanning their surroundings. The atmosphere inside the ship felt wrong, as if the air itself was tainted by whatever had once inhabited the vessel. "Stay close," Jake said, his hand hovering over his weapon. "We don't know what's in here." The ship was eerily empty. No bodies, no signs of life, just long-abandoned consoles and dim, flickering lights. But the deeper they ventured, the more unsettling it became. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, symbols that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly energy. Zura stopped in front of one of the symbols, her expression grave. "These markings, they're warnings. The Telethians encountered them before. It means we're close to something dangerous." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous how?" Zura didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly over the symbol. "The darkness leaves traces of itself behind. This ship, it's been corrupted. Whatever was on it, whatever touched it, left part of itself here. That's what the energy signature is." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying the darkness infects things?" Zura nodded slowly. "Not just things. People too. It warps them, changes them. That's why we can't let it spread." Jake's grip tightened on his weapon. The thought of something so insidious was terrifying, but it also made him more determined. "Then let's find whatever's left of it and get out of here." They continued deeper into the ship, the symbols becoming more frequent and more erratic. The atmosphere grew heavier, and Jake could feel a pressure building in the back of his mind, like a presence lurking just out of sight. He glanced at Zura, who seemed to be struggling with the same sensation. Suddenly, Athena's voice crackled in their helmets. "I'm detecting an anomaly ahead. It's emitting a strong energy signature." Jake's pulse quickened. "We're getting close." They rounded a corner and entered what appeared to be the ship's central chamber. In the middle of the room, hovering just above the floor, was a large black sphere, pulsating with a dim, eerie light. It seemed to draw the surrounding darkness into itself, like a black hole devouring everything around it. Jake stepped forward cautiously. "What is that?" Zura's voice was barely a whisper. "It's a fragment of the darkness. A piece of its essence, left behind to spread its influence." Jake stared at the sphere, mesmerized by its slow, rhythmic pulsing. There was something both terrifying and captivating about it, as if it held the secrets of the universe, but at a terrible cost. "We can't let this thing stay here," Jake said, snapping himself out of the trance. "If it's part of the darkness, we need to destroy it." Zura hesitated. "It's not that simple, Jake. Destroying it might release whatever's left inside. We don't know what it could do." Jake's mind raced. He understood the risk, but leaving something so dangerous behind wasn't an option. "Then what do we do? We can't just leave it here to fester." Before Zura could respond, the room began to hum with a low, ominous vibration. The sphere pulsed faster, and the air around them seemed to ripple as if reality itself was being distorted. "Athena," Jake shouted into his com. "What's happening?" "The energy signature is spiking." Athena responded, her voice tense. "Something's waking up." Zura's eyes widened in alarm. "We need to leave. Now." But before they could move, the shadows in the room seemed to coalesce, forming a figure. Dark, twisted silhouette that stepped forward from the edges of the chamber. Its form was barely distinguishable. A mass of shifting blackness with glowing red eyes. Jake froze, his breath catching in his throat. "What the hell is that?" Zura's voice was tight with fear. "It's a remnant, the being left behind by the darkness." The creature didn't speak, but its presence was overwhelming, pressing down on Jake like a physical force. He raised his weapon, but Zura grabbed his arm. "You can't fight it, Jake. We have to run." Jake's instincts screamed to fire, but he trusted Zura. Together, they turned and bolted for the exit, the dark figure pursuing them with eerie silence. The ship seemed to shift around them as they ran, corridors warping and twisting, as if the darkness was reshaping reality itself. They barely made it to the airlock, slamming the controls to disengage. The ship lurched free just as the dark figure reached the doorway, its glowing eyes fixed on Jake. As they pulled away, the alien ship vanished into the void, swallowed by the darkness once more. Back aboard Jake's ship, the two of them sat in silence, their breaths heavy. The data they'd collected was invaluable, but the encounter had shaken them both. "We were lucky to get out," Zura said quietly, her hands trembling slightly. "That thing, it wasn't even a fraction of the darkness power." Jake stared out at the stars, his mind still racing. "We have the proof we need now," he said, his voice hollow, "but I don't know if we're ready for what's coming." Zura turned to him, her expression grave. "We don't have a choice, Jake. The darkness is coming, whether we're ready or not." And as the vast emptiness of space stretched out before them, Jake knew that their fragile alliance, their tentative understanding, was all that stood between humanity and the coming storm. The days after their escape from the shadow ship felt like a blur to Jake. He couldn't shake the image of the dark figure. Those glowing red eyes seared into his mind like a nightmare that refused to fade. He spent hours reviewing the data Athena had collected, poring over the energy readings, the strange symbols, and every piece of information they had gathered on the remnant of the darkness. Zura, too, seemed changed by the encounter. She was quieter, her usual playfulness replaced with a grim resolve. They both knew that what they had witnessed was only a glimpse of the larger threat looming over the galaxy. And now, they had to convince the rest of humanity to take it seriously. One evening, as the stars outside the cockpit glittered faintly, Zura broke the silence. "You're thinking about how to present this to your leaders," she said softly, her glowing eyes fixed on Jake. Jake glanced at her, his face drawn. "Yeah. I don't even know where to start. A rogue patrol officer and an alien warning of some ancient galactic darkness. They'll think I've lost my mind." Zura leaned back in her chair, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "They'll think that for about 5 seconds. Then they'll realize what's at stake." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe, but getting them to actually do something, that's a whole different battle." Earth's leaders aren't exactly known for acting fast, especially when the threat feels distant. Zura's expression turned serious. "It won't feel distant for long, Jake. The darkness moves faster than any government can. By the time they decide to act, it might already be too late." Jake knew she was right, but convincing the galaxy's most powerful factions to rally against an invisible enemy was a daunting task. Still, they had no choice. The remnants of the shadow ship and the creature they'd encountered were proof enough that the darkness was real, and that it was coming. "Then we'll make them listen," Jake said firmly. "We've got the data. We've got you as a witness. If we present it right, they'll have no choice." Zura's gaze softened. "You've got a lot of faith in your people. That's a rare thing, Jake." Jake gave a small shrug, a smirk tugging at his lips. "What can I say? We humans are stubborn." The next few days were spent in preparation. Jake had made the decision to head back to Earth, back to the heart of the Turan coalition. It would be the best place to start. If they could convince the Earth government, they could rally the rest of the human colonies, and hopefully the other species in the galaxy, to the cause. But there was always the risk that they'd be met with suspicion, especially with Zura at his side. Despite humanity's progress, xenophobia still lingered in certain circles, and a mysterious alien speaking of galactic doom could be seen as a threat in itself. As they approached the outskirts of the solar system, Athena's voice broke through the quiet hum of the ship's engines. Incoming transmission from Earth Command. They've detected our ship and are requesting identification. Jake's heart rate spiked. This was it. He glanced at Zura, who gave him a reassuring nod. Patch them through, Jake said, straightening in his seat. A moment later, the screen flickered to life, revealing a stern-faced officer in the uniform of the Turan Coalition. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Jake. Lieutenant Harris, this is Commander Ross. Your patrol was scheduled to end 2 weeks ago. Care to explain why you're returning in a civilian vessel? Jake cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. Commander, I've encountered something unprecedented. I need to speak with the High Council immediately. This is a matter of galactic security. Ross's expression remained unchanged, his gaze shifting briefly to Zura, who sat calmly beside Jake. And who is your companion? An alien, by the looks of it. Are you aware that unauthorized contact with non-coalition species is a violation of protocol? Jake's jaw clenched. He had expected resistance, but not this early. Commander, I don't have time to explain everything overcomes. I've discovered an imminent threat. Something bigger than any protocol violation. You need to let me speak with the Council. There was a tense silence on the other end as Ross studied Jake and Zura with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Finally, he spoke. Stand by for authorization. We'll be sending a retrieval team to escort you to Earth Command. And Lieutenant, Ross's eyes hardened. Don't try anything. If your story doesn't check out, you'll be facing charges for desertion, among other things. The transmission cut off, leaving Jake and Zura in the heavy silence of the cockpit. Well, that went about as well as I expected, Jake muttered, leaning back in his chair. Zura gave him a teasing smile. I think you handled it pretty well, considering. At least they didn't shoot us out of the sky. Jake snorted. Yeah, small victories. Hours later, they were escorted to Earth Command's central hub, a massive complex that floated in orbit above Earth like a fortress in the stars. Jake had been here before, but never under such dire circumstances. As they docked and were led into the sprawling corridors by a group of armed soldiers, he felt the weight of what they were about to face pressing down on him. The High Council was waiting in a secure briefing room, a long table surrounded by holographic displays and military personnel. At the head of the table sat the most powerful figures in the Turan Coalition, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Lieutenant Harris, one of them, an older woman with sharp eyes, said as they entered, "You've made quite the entrance. We've reviewed your reports, and frankly, we're concerned. Bringing an unknown alien species into Coalition space without prior authorization is a serious breach of protocol." Jake took a deep breath, standing tall. I understand that, Counselor, but this isn't about protocol. It's about survival. He stepped forward, activating the data Athena had compiled. The holographic display sprang to life, showing the readings from the shadow ship, the strange symbols, and the energy signatures that had terrified both him and Zura. This, Jake said, his voice steady, is a remnant of a force far beyond anything we've encountered before. It's called the Darkness, and it's spreading. We encountered one of its remnants, a ship that had been corrupted by it. If we don't act, the entire galaxy could be at risk. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern as they studied the data. Jake could see their resolve wavering, but he knew they weren't convinced yet. Zura stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "My people have faced the darkness before," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We lost entire worlds to it. We thought we had sealed it away, but it's returned. And now, it's targeting your galaxy." Her words hung in the air, and the council fell into a heavy silence. Finally, the older woman spoke again, her voice quieter but laced with urgency. "What do you propose we do, Lieutenant?" Jake looked her directly in the eyes, his own resolve firm. "We need to unite the galaxy. Every species, every faction. We need to stand together against this threat, or we're all doomed." The room was quiet, the weight of his words sinking in. Finally, one of the counselors spoke, his voice hesitant but determined. "If what you're saying is true, then this is a war like none we've ever seen." And in that moment, Jake knew that the storm had truly begun. After Jake and Zura's meeting with the Terran Coalition's High Council, an air of tension hung over Earth Command. It was clear the Council was beginning to grasp the magnitude of the threat, but fear and politics still slowed their response. Jake's data had sparked the Council's curiosity, yet there was no immediate action, just promises of further investigation and careful deliberation. Jake paced the narrow hallway outside the Council chamber, his hands clenched into fists. He had done everything right, presented the evidence, and laid out the case. Yet it felt like they were still treating it like an academic exercise, not a clear and present danger. Zura watched him, her glowing eyes betraying a hint of sympathy. "You can't expect them to move fast. Bureaucracy has its own gravity. It slows everything down." Jake stopped and turned toward her. "We don't have time for bureaucracy. The darkness isn't going to wait for them to form committees." "I know," Zura said gently, "but we've planted the seed. They're scared, Jake. That's a start." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Scared isn't enough. They need to act." As if on cue, a tall, grim-faced officer approached, his uniform adorned with medals and insignia that marked him as someone of considerable rank. He stopped in front of Jake and Zura, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant Harris," he said, his voice clipped, "I'm General Marcus Reed. The Council has instructed me to take you into protective custody until further notice. The situation is complicated." Jake blinked, his frustration boiling over. "Protective custody? We don't need protection, General. We need the Coalition to prepare for what's coming." Reed's face remained stony. "The Council is reviewing your evidence, but there are concerns. Until they make a decision, you'll be held at a secure facility." "Concerns?" Jake's voice was incredulous. "About what? The evidence is clear." "Concerns about her," Reed interrupted, his gaze shifting to Zura. "The presence of an alien with unverified claims, coupled with an unsanctioned encounter, has raised red flags. Some believe this might be part of a larger deception." Zura tensed, her eyes narrowing. "A deception? You think I'm lying?" Reed didn't answer directly. "Until the Council makes a determination. We have orders. You're to come with us." Jake took a step forward, standing between Zura and the General. "This is insane. You're wasting time when we should be preparing for a war." The General's expression softened just slightly, as if he understood Jake's frustration. "I'm not your enemy, Lieutenant, but you have to understand that the Council needs more than your word before they can mobilize an entire military effort. This is how it works." Jake clenched his jaw, feeling a surge of helplessness wash over him. He wanted to shout, to demand they listen, but deep down, he knew the General was right, at least about the politics. This wasn't going to be as simple as presenting evidence and expecting action. The Coalition wasn't built to move quickly, especially not when it involved unknown alien threats. Zura's hand rested lightly on Jake's arm, her touch calming him. "We'll go with them, Jake, for now." Jake glanced at her, his mind racing. "Are you sure?" Zura gave him a small nod. "We'll play their game. But don't worry, there are always other ways." Reluctantly, Jake nodded and turned back to General Reed. Fine. We'll go, but don't think for a second that you're stopping anything. The darkness is coming whether you're ready or not. Reed gave a curt nod, then gestured to the soldiers behind him. This way. Hours later, Jake and Zura found themselves confined to a secure facility on one of Earth Command's orbital stations. The room they were given was more luxurious than a typical holding cell, but the heavy security presence outside the door was a clear reminder that they were not free to leave. Jake paced the room, his mind racing with thoughts of how to break through the bureaucracy, how to convince the council to act. Zura, meanwhile, sat cross-legged on the floor, seemingly unbothered by their situation. "You seem awfully calm," Jake muttered, glancing at her. Zura smiled faintly. "I've been in tighter spots. Besides, panicking won't help. We need to think strategically." Jake stopped pacing and sat down across from her, his brow furrowed. "I just feel like we're wasting time. Every minute we're stuck here, that thing out there is gaining ground." "Maybe," Zura said thoughtfully, "but we're not out of options. There are others we can reach out to." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Like who?" Zura's glowing eyes sparkled. "The Telethians aren't the only species who face the darkness. There are others, scattered civilizations who survived its first wave, hiding in the outer fringes of the galaxy. If we can find them, they might help us." Jake leaned forward, his interest piqued. "You think they'd listen to us?" Zura nodded. "If they see the same signs we've seen, they will. They've been waiting, just like us, for this moment." Jake's mind started to race again, but this time with a glimmer of hope. "How do we reach them?" Before Zura could answer, the door to their room slid open with a hiss. General Reed stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "The council has made their decision," he said, his voice carefully controlled. Jake and Zura exchanged a glance before standing. "And?" Jake asked, his voice tense. Reed's gaze flickered between them, and for the first time, Jake saw a hint of uncertainty in the general's eyes. "They've authorized a small reconnaissance mission," he said slowly. "You'll be allowed to investigate further, but under strict supervision. They're sending a fleet, but it won't be a full mobilization. You'll have to provide definitive proof of this threat before we can commit more resources." Jake's heart sank. It wasn't enough. A reconnaissance mission wouldn't stop the darkness. It was barely more than a token gesture, but it was something. "We'll take it," Jake said, his voice firm. "When do we leave?" Reed stepped aside, allowing two armed guards to enter. "Now, your ship is waiting." As they made their way back to their vessel, Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. This was their one chance to prove the threat was real. If they failed, it wasn't just their lives on the line. It was the fate of the galaxy. Zura, walking beside him, seemed to sense his anxiety. "Don't worry, Jake. We're not alone in this." Jake gave her a small, determined smile. "I know, but we need to make sure everyone else knows that too." As they boarded their ship, ready to embark on the most critical mission of their lives, the shadows of the gathering storm loomed larger than ever. The darkness was coming, and it was up to them to face it head-on. With a final glance back at the distant lights of Earth, Jake steeled himself for the battle ahead. This was just the beginning. As their ship surged into the depths of space, the familiar sights of Earth receded, replaced by the cold expanse of the universe. Jake stood at the helm, staring into the infinite starfield. Each twinkling light reminded him of the lives that could be lost if they failed in their mission. Zura took her place beside him, her expression a mix of determination and concern. "What's our plan, Jake?" He sighed, pulling up a star chart on the display. "We need to identify the locations of the civilizations you mentioned, those who have faced the darkness. If we can find them, they might provide us with the resources and information we need." Zura nodded, her fingers hovering over the controls as she studied the data. "The closest known systems are the Olokari and the Draxan colonies. They're both in the outer fringes of the galaxy, and they'd had their own brushes with the dark forces. Jake felt a surge of hope at the mention of those names. Let's plot a course for the Olokari first. They were known for their advanced technology. If anyone can help us, it's them. As the ship adjusted its trajectory, a sudden alert blared through the cockpit. Jake's heart raced as he quickly examined the scanner. What's happening? Zura's fingers danced across the controls, her face growing serious. We've detected an anomaly ahead. It looks like a rift, but it's unstable. We should avoid it. Jake gripped the edge of the control panel, his mind racing with the implications. What if it's a shortcut? If we can navigate through, we could reach the Olokari sooner. Zura's expression turned grave. We could also end up trapped or worse. The darkness may be lurking within. Jake weighed the options, frustration boiling beneath the surface. He didn't want to waste time, but Zura was right. They couldn't afford to take unnecessary risks. Fine, let's chart a safe course around it. As they adjusted their path, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of urgency gnawing at him. Time was not on their side, and every moment wasted brought the darkness closer. Hours later, the ship flew smoothly through the dark void, and after a restless night of monitoring systems and strategizing, Jake and Zura approached the Olokari system. They entered the atmosphere of the planet designated as Olokara Prime, a lush world covered in dense forests and mountains. As they descended, the vibrant colors of the landscape swirled beneath them. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he caught a glimpse of a sprawling city built into the hills. That must be their capital, he said, his voice filled with awe. Zura's eyes lit up with curiosity. They've adapted well to their environment. This could work to our advantage. As the ship touched down, they were met by a welcoming committee of Olokari diplomats, their features distinct with emerald skin and luminous markings. Jake stepped out of the ship, his heart racing with both anticipation and anxiety. One of the diplomats, a tall figure adorned in intricate robes, stepped forward. Welcome, travelers. I'm High Counselor Tolan. We have been expecting you. Expecting us? Jake echoed, surprised. Tolan nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. Your arrival was foretold. We have felt the stirrings of darkness as well. You come seeking allies against this looming threat. Jake exchanged a glance with Zura, relief flooding through him. Yes, exactly. We need your help. The coalition is mobilizing. But we fear it won't be enough. Tolan's expression turned grave. We are aware of the darkness. It has come for our people before, but we have our own challenges to face. The shadow looms over our land, and many are afraid. Zura stepped forward, her voice steady. Fear can be a weapon, but we need to unite against this threat. If we stand divided, we will fall. Tolan regarded her thoughtfully. You speak wisely. Perhaps we can gather the council and discuss a plan of action. There are those who wish to fight, but they need to know they are not alone. Within hours, the Olokari Council convened, a group of wise leaders representing the various factions of their civilization. The room was filled with murmurs and cautious glances as Jake and Zura presented their findings. The darkness is an ancient enemy, Jake explained, using holographic projections to illustrate their encounters. It consumes worlds, preying on fear and despair. We cannot allow it to gain a foothold here. Several council members voiced their doubts, their eyes darting between Jake and Zura. How can we trust these outsiders? One elder questioned. What if they bring more danger? Tolan raised a hand to silence the room. This is not the time for division. We face a common enemy, and together, we have a chance to survive. Zura added, we are here to forge alliances. Together, we can not only defend our worlds but strike back at the heart of this darkness. As the discussion continued, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had come seeking help, but what they found was a shared commitment to resist the encroaching shadows. After hours of debate, the council finally reached a consensus. We will assist you, Tolan announced, standing tall. Our forces will join yours, and we will make preparations to repel the darkness. But we must act swiftly. The more time we waste, the stronger it becomes. Jake's heart surged with hope. Thank you. We won't let you down. In the following days, Jake and Zura worked alongside the Olakari, training their forces and coordinating strategies. They shared knowledge, weaponry, and technology, creating a formidable alliance. As they prepared for their first joint operation, Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. This was their moment to make a stand, to show the coalition that unity was possible against the darkness. Zura caught him staring at the horizon, lost in thought. "What's on your mind?" Jake sighed, glancing at her. "I just hope we're ready. This darkness, it's more than just a physical threat. It preys on our fears, and I worry that's what makes it so powerful." Zura placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Remember what we've learned. Fear is a tool we can wield against it. If we confront our fears together, we can overcome anything." Jake nodded, feeling a spark of resolve igniting within him. "You're right. We're not alone in this." The day of the operation arrived, and the combined forces of the Terran Coalition and the Olakari stood ready. Jake surveyed the battlefield from the command center, his heart racing. The dark clouds loomed ominously overhead, a reflection of the encroaching darkness. As the order was given to advance, the air was filled with the roar of engines and the hum of energy weapons charging. The Allied forces moved forward, united in purpose. Suddenly, the dark rift opened above them, and from it poured shadows, twisting forms that writhed and screamed as they descended. Panic erupted in the ranks, but Jake steadied himself, recalling Zura's words. "Focus. Remember why we fight," he shouted, rallying the troops. Zura fought by his side, her energy blades cutting through the darkness with brilliant light. The Olakari warriors, emboldened by their unity, followed suit, pushing back against the encroaching threat. Together, they forged a line, pushing forward into the dark tide. Jake fought with every ounce of strength he had, fueled by the knowledge that they were fighting not just for their own survival, but for all who would come after them. Just when it seemed the darkness would overwhelm them, the Olakari unleashed their secret weapon. Beam of concentrated energy that shot up into the rift, destabilizing it. The shadows hesitated, their forms flickering as the light struck them. "Now," Jake roared, seizing the moment. "Advance." With renewed determination, the combined forces surged forward, pushing back the darkness. The screams of the shadow beings echoed through the air, mingling with the rallying cries of the soldiers. They pressed on, reclaiming lost ground with each step. The tide began to turn. The darkness was retreating, but it wasn't over yet. Jake knew they had to seal the rift before it could regenerate. "Zura, we need to close that rift," he shouted, pointing to the chaotic maelstrom above. She nodded, her expression fierce. "I'll channel energy through the devices we built. We need everyone to focus on it." Jake rallied the troops around him, their determination surging as they aligned their weapons toward the rift. With Zura at the center, they poured their energy into one concentrated beam of light. As the beam shot upwards, the rift shrieked, the shadows within it writhing in agony. With a final burst of light, the rift collapsed in on itself, sealing the darkness away. With the rift closed, the battlefield fell silent. The remaining shadows evaporated, and the Allied forces stood victorious, their bodies weary but their spirits triumphant. Jake looked around, taking in the faces of those who had fought alongside him. Olakari and Terrans, united against a common enemy. He felt a swell of pride and gratitude wash over him. Tolan approached, his emerald skin glowing with relief. "You have done the impossible, Jake Harris. You brought our worlds together in the face of overwhelming darkness." Jake shook his head, humbled. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. We fought together and won together." Zura stepped beside him, her glowing eyes reflecting the light of their victory. "This is just the beginning. The darkness may have been pushed back, But we must remain vigilant. There are other worlds that still need our help. Jake nodded, determination hardening in his chest. We can't stop now. We've seen what's at stake, and we have allies to gather. Tolan raised a hand, his expression serious. You have my word. The Olakari will help you spread the word of this victory. Together, we will forge a coalition strong enough to face any darkness. With renewed purpose, Jake turned his gaze towards the stars, a spark of hope igniting within him. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but he knew the journey ahead was long and fraught with challenges. As they began to discuss their next steps, Jake realized that they were no longer just survivors. They were the harbingers of a new alliance, ready to confront the shadows that threatened their existence. And together, they would light the way through the darkness.